University, and he'll be talking to us about interval positroid varieties and the deformation of the ring of symmetric functions.
Thanks so much to the organizers for giving me this opportunity. It's happy to talk about positroid varieties, but first I want to talk about some non-algebraic combinatorics, and I will also have no formal power series. So here's this thing from 50 years ago in non-algebraic combinatorics, in extremal combinatorics, this technique that was used to prove if you have a bunch of k-element subsets of 1 through n, and any two of them intersect, then the obvious way to maximize that, where all your subsets have an element in common, such as n-1, choose q-1 of them, that's the best you can do. So the way Erdős, Coe, and Rado prove this fact, they start with a general collection, and they keep turning smaller numbers into bigger numbers as long as nothing's in the way. So let me define this in 3 steps. If I've got a number, and it's I, I'll turn it into j. Otherwise, I'll leave it alone. It'll stay whatever number it was. So with just one number, there can't be something in the way. If I've got, is this no? Or I could do space. Yes. All right. So if you've got a subset of 1 through n, then you go through to each of the elements and you apply the shifting turning I into j. So basically you look through it and you see, is I there? And if it's there, then you turn it into j, unless j is already there. So this will not change the size of your subset. And for a collection, so I want to, of course a collection is a set, but it'll be too confusing if I call everything a set. So when I have a bunch of subsets, I'll call that a collection. To a collection, I go through and I apply the previous shifting operation to every subset. And what might happen is I get another subset I already have. So if when I apply it, I get something new, and that new thing is already there, then I don't apply it. I leave it alone, and consequently, the number of subsets I have in my collection doesn't change. So what they do is they turn 1 into 4, and 2 into 3, and they keep moving numbers forward, and they prove that under this shifting operation on collections, if your collection had the property that any two things intersected to begin with, then the new collection will still have this property. And eventually this terminates. If you only shift things forward from smaller numbers to bigger, then this process terminates. And when you're done, the number n will be in all of your subsets. So the best you could have done is, so at that point, of course, there's n-1 choose k-1. And they prove a little bit more that if you get to that point, then following it backwards, there was some number that wasn't all the subsets. So, I'm sorry, that's under the assumption k is less than half n. Of course, if k is more than half n, then you can take whatever subsets you want, because any two of them will intersect. So this was a basic thing in extremal combinatorics. It has gotten a lot of use in studying simplicial complexes and other related such things. So it's been brought into more algebraic combinatorics, and I'm going to bring it in a slightly different way, because I'm not going to apply to simplicial complexes. Instead, I'm going to be thinking of it as the combinatorial version of something I want to do inside of Riemannian. So I want to think about instead of a collection of k-element subsets in 1 through n, I'll be thinking about a bunch of k-dimensional subspaces in n space. So I'm not going to do things over FQ and count points like that. But I'm not going to have finitely many such subspaces. I'm going to have some whole infinite family of them, some continuous variety inside the Riemannian. So parameterizing my set will be some guy x living inside the Riemannian k-planes. And I said Cn here, but that's because I like to open Cn. So you can go back and forth between these two pictures, the combinatorial one of a collection of K-element subsets, and the geometric one, the variety inside the Grassmannian. So one of them is from a while ago due to Neil White. You take your collection and you think of so a bunch of K-element subsets. You think of those as defining Plicker coordinates on the Grassmannian, and you say those are the only ones that are allowed to be non-zero. All other Plicker coordinates must die. So this is not quite the matroid stratification of Delphin and Serganova as discussed before. They say, let's have the other ones be zero and have these be non-zero. And frequently, that means you get the empty set, that you have a non-realizable matroid, and there are no points in the Grassmannian for which you can get exactly that pattern of these things being zero, these things being non-zero. So Neil White doesn't do that. He says make these be zero, and the other ones might or might not be zero. As a consequence, there's lots of things that are obviously in this closed set in the Grassmannian. All of the coordinate subspaces corresponding to the subsets that actually are in the collection. So the coordinate subspace uses k of the coordinates, and not the other inline is k. So one of the most obvious k-planes, or n choose k of the most obvious k-planes. Those ones will be in this subset we define in the Grassmannian this way. So what I'm saying here is this thing, that if you take a collection and you say, let's define the scheme in the Grassmannian by killing the other Plicker coordinates, and then take the coordinate subspaces, the ones that are invariant under the action of the diagonal matrices, then you just get your collection back. So what about the other direction? What if you start with a subscheme of the Grassmannian and you take the coordinate subspaces in it? So frequently there will be none of these. So I'm not going to start with general subschemes. My subschemes will always be invariant under the action of the diagonal matrices, which I call T. So they'll always be T invariant, but that doesn't mean each point is T invariant. You just take the points that are T invariant, you end up with a bunch of coordinate subspaces, so a collection and then choose K. And my statement here is I start with the variety, I take the T fixed points, I apply Neil White's construction, and I might get something bigger than the original variety.
That was very well planned, Alan.
I'll tell you say right. So it might have. So what can happen here is that you get something larger. That and it can also happen that you get something smaller if your scheme isn't reduced. So stupid thing. What if we have the Grassmannian of one planes in two space? So CP1, and we say, and our subscheme Y is one of the two T fixed points, but it's really fat. We have it with multiplicity 17 or something. Then when you take the fixed points on that, you'll just get this one, and you want the other, and then you say, I'd like to kill that other Plicker coordinate, and you get this guy with multiplicity 1, not with multiplicity 17. So you need this reduciveness in order to get this as a contained with the schemes. So one thing that this should point out, though, is that it's interesting to ask when is this equality, which is to say, what do the subschemes of the Grassmannian that are defined by the vanishing of Plicker coordinates look like? And this is not so far off from Mugnot's universality theorem, either gross, but occasionally it's nice to find some variety in the Grassmannian you like, and positroid varieties, the ones that I like, are defined by vanishing Plicker coordinates, which is something that I proved with Thomas Lamb and David Spire. Okay, so this so far is about going back and forth between a combinatorial and a linear situation, or a geometric situation. And now I want to get back to the shifting. So this is the matrix with just one entry in the ij coordinate, and the matrix actually took up too much space on my slide, so I did this. So I've got this matrix with ones down the diagonal, t in the corner, and I can apply that to any k-plane, get myself another k-plane. I can apply that to a variety of k-planes, get myself another variety. If I do that for any finite t, I just get some isomorphic subvariety of the Riemannian. I start with some guy x, and I hit it with this thing, and I get something else isomorphic to x, which will no longer be invariant under the diagonal matrices. So if x was invariant, and I hit it with this thing, it's not invariant under that anymore. Until I take this limit, t goes to infinity. This limiting guy will again be torus invariant, and that's what I'm going to call the shift, the geometric shift of a variety in the Riemannian. So it's a little tricky to think about what this operation does. It's easy enough to do it to individual points. So if you have any particular point in the Riemannian, that point will limit to. So if I start with one t fixed point, so a coordinate k-plane, and I move it using this guy, I'll get myself another coordinate k-plane, and that'll exactly be given by the subset shift from the previous slide. What about if so let's imagine doing that on, again, the Riemannian one planes in 2 space, just a projective line. What this does to any single point in that space is move it to the coordinate line that uses the first coordinate. I'm shifting 2 to 1 though. So every point on CP1 limits to the same point, but that's not the limit of the set. For any finite t, the CP1 is moving around, but for any finite t, it's still the whole CP1, and so the limit as t goes to infinity is still the whole CP1. Every point falls into this hole, but the set still has more to supply for all t, even t. And so that's going to be somehow what's geometrically implementing the shifting where things can be in the way. So if I started with 2 points in CP1, which are the 2 t fixed points, and I took the limit, they'd fall on top of each other. And I'd say, well, somehow this guy wasn't in the way of that one, they fell on top of each other. But what I proved is that if you start with something irreducible and torus invariant, then when you take the t fixed points and shift them in the combinatorial sense, that's the same as shifting in the geometric sense and then taking the t fixed points. But that, as I say with this example of the 2 points, relies on x being irreducible, or x being one of these Neal-White schemes. Yes.
So what's t here again?
Diagonal matrices.
Just
Big T is diagonal matrices. I probably should use the Z here.
just to check the factorization, x is reduced and open parenthesis irreducible or deformed closed parenthesis.
That's why I've got the comma there.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I had to figure out how I wanted to phrase that. I didn't want it parenthetical because it's important, and I also wanted it to fit. Right. So we're going to be using these shifts, and so these shifts, I dug them out of Ravi Vakil's paper called The Geometric Littlewood-Richardson Rule, where he doesn't say it in this way, but this is what he's doing is he goes from one subvariety of the Riemannian to another, to another, to another, and then figured out later that they're connected to the Erdős-Corrado story, which one doesn't find in his paper. So what does one find in his paper? He's interested in taking a Schubert variety intersect an opposite Schubert variety. So here B is upper triangular matrices and minus is lower triangular, and you might disagree with which one's a Schubert and which one's an opposite Schubert variety. I like to do things so that for cohomology purposes, that that I want the whole of Riemannian to correspond to the empty partition. So for that reason, I'm using B minus on my Schuberts and B on my opposite Schuberts. Whatever. So in Schubert calculus, which is what he was getting into, we want to intersect two Schubert varieties on the Riemannian, but that's not actually what we want to do. We want to do it only in cohomology, so one has to make them transverse, and the easy way to make them transverse is for one of them to be an opposite Schubert variety. So we start with that, this x sub mu intersect x super nu, and want to rewrite that in the basis of Schubert classes, the basis in homology of Schubert classes, and the coefficients are the famous little Richardson numbers. The way he does this is to start with with this intersection and apply these shifting operators in a very certain order. And this is the order. He starts shifting n minus 1, and eventually does all the I to j shifts, each exactly once, but he really wants it to be in this order. So for the original Erdős-Corrado results, it doesn't matter. You just shift in whatever order you want, and the sets don't care, the collections don't care. Eventually the thing is shifted as it's going to be.
The first one is from n minus 1 to n?
Yes, the first one is from n minus 1 to n, sorry. And the other ones are corrector, I think. So the majority rule on this. Right, so he wants to do them in this order because what happens during the shifting process is that things break. He'll start with a variety and he'll shift it, and it will then become reducible. It'll have multiple components, and he'll say, okay, split those components up and then deal with them individually. So one clear reason you're going to want to do something like that is that Littlewood-Richardson numbers can be more than 1. So if he didn't do that, the scheme theory makes sense, it's fine. You start with this original irreducible reduced subvariety, do these shifts, and when you're done, you end up with this really schemy thing. And how schemy is it? Well, the multiplicity of the component x super lambda will be the Littlewood-Richardson number. So he says, instead of getting into this scheme with all these multiplicities on the components, let's break it at each stage. And what happens, the amazing theorem is that at each stage, the lengths of the components are 1, not 5. So you can, once you deal with them separately, then you never have to deal with counting, looking at the length of the scheme and the multiplicity, how fat it is. So he proves 4 things. One is that if you start with this Richardson variety, the Schubert intersect opposite Schubert, and you do the shifts in this order, and you always break into pieces when you encounter them, you never run into scheminess on the components. When you're done, you end up with opposite Schubert varieties. So that part's not at all surprising. We're doing enough here to generate the Borel subgroup, and so we're going to get things that are invariant into that Borel subgroup. And he indexes these with this new combinatorics he invents called that he calls checker games, and consequently the checker game counts the Littlewood-Richardson numbers. He has one more result that is not going to generalize when I get to the things I want to talk about, which is that this tree he makes only branches into 2 things at each step, 1 or 2. So as he degenerates, the Knuth guy could again be irreducible, or it could have 2 components, not 6. And mine can have 6. So what are mine? I'm thinking about not all positroid varieties, but just integral positroid varieties. So the relation to, so in Felipe's terms, remember that Felipe explains that a matroid polytope for a positroid, all of the facets are given by dot products with, or the normal vectors to the facets are given by cyclic intervals. So I want them to be just given by intervals, not cyclic intervals, because cyclic intervals is too hard, and so Nick Ford's has all these horrible counterexamples that show that the stuff I'm going to say is not going to work for general positroid varieties. but also because the case that we care about to begin with, the Richardson varieties, those are defined by intervals and not cyclic intervals. So for Schubert, they're defined by initial intervals. For an opposite Schubert, they're defined by terminal intervals. And for Richardson, they're defined not just by initial and terminal. They can have things pop up in the middle, but at least they're all intervals and not cyclic intervals. Okay, so here's the positroid variety, or the interval positroid variety, even better, associated to a upper triangular partial permutation. So upper triangular partial permutation looks like that. Okay, it's I tend not to put ones in my permutation matrices because I use ones for other things sometimes. So I'm going to talk about the dots of a partial permutation instead of the ones. And they don't have to be in every row. They better not be, or the identity matrix. In fact, there's going to be n minus k dots in this n by n matrix. And what you do with this to figure out which positroid variety you're thinking about, you look, let's say, so you have some entry ij, you look how many dots there are southwest of that ij, and you say, that's putting a rank condition on this interval in my k by n matrix. I want the co-rank of this to be at least the number of dots in this part southwest of the ij entry. So the largest the rank could possibly be is the width, and I'm saying I want the rank to be bounded by the width minus that number of dots, as I say here. So the closer the dots are to the southwest, the worse. The lower the rank and the smaller the variety. And the generic case is when they are in a diagonal and k steps up from the main diagonal. Okay, so what I prove, and I'll tell you more about how to do this combinatorially, but what I prove is that if you do Rabi-Vakil's shifts in the order that he said, and you do them not just to Richardson varieties to begin with, but more generally to one of these interval positroid varieties, then everything he said works, and I prove a bunch more. So, sorry, everything he said except for the splitting into two, that I often split into more pieces. But remember what he said. He said things are generically reduced, and I actually prove that each one of these shifts is honestly reduced, that there isn't extra fuzz on the scheme showing up in lower dimension. So all the way down, things are reduced. He proves that you get to Schubert varieties, and as I said, that's not a big surprise. That's the easy part. But now I'm computing a different thing. What I'm computing is the class of this. I'm computing the class of this guy in homology. And actually, I soup up these results to do equivariant homology and K-theory and equivariant K-theory. So what's involved in getting these as opposed to just the picture I said before? The difference with K-theory is that when I say this guy degenerate, so I've got, imagine I have CP1, for example, degenerating to a union of two CP1s at a point. So for homology, I'd say the class of the original guy equals the class of the degenerate one, which is then this one plus that one. For K-theory, I have to say it's this one plus that one minus the intersection. In K-theory, you have to get into inclusion-exclusion. So let me give a very, very specific example. Imagine I'm thinking about GR24. So that's two planes in 4 space, but projectively you can think about it as lines in 3 space. So I want to think about the lines in 3 space that touch this line and that touch that line. And if you want to tell somebody one of those lines over the phone, you tell them the point of intersection here and the point of intersection there, and tell them to connect those two. So there's a 2-parameter space of lines touching these 2 lines. What happens during this shift is that this line degenerates down to there. Now we're thinking about lines that touch these two lines, and now there's cases. If a line touches these two lines, it might go through the point in common, or it might be in the plane in common, or both. And the or both is what you have to subtract off when doing K-theory instead of just homology. So also, what's happening in K-theory that I need to know when it breaks into pieces, what happens at the intersections of those pieces. And it turns out all of those intersections are, again, integral positroid varieties, and the intersections are reduced, things aren't strangely tangents to one another, so this follows from Frobenius splitting results that I have with Thomas and David. Okay, so equivariant homology, the difference is as I've got this, in this case it was this two-dimensional family of lines generating from a different two-dimensional family of lines, it'll go through a three-dimensional family of them, and that three-dimensional guy is, again, an integral positroid variety, and that's one more term that contributes to the equivariant homology. So you get that three-dimensional term times an equivariant number. All right, so the one other thing that, so the one other thing that I do beyond what's in Vakil, so I get these other cohomology theories and use more general spaces, but also my combinatorics is strictly better in the following sense. So when he wants to write down one of his checker games, that takes a lot of paper. It's each checkerboard, so it's a sequence of checkerboards, and each one of them is a two-dimensional thing. So when you put them all together, it's this 2 + 1 dimensional thing. And I managed to compress that to something 1 + 1 dimension. So I'll tell you how that works, and then show you a quick example. Two quick examples. So the order that he's doing things is like this, and I encode that by filling in this triangle with these two kinds of tiles. And most of the time, as you're filling this in, you'll have two different numbers, or two different labels, and you'll say, okay, they have to go through each other. If the two labels are the same, and they're not 0, then the other two labels must be 0. That's what I'm saying here. And only there's a choice if these two labels are 0, then what could those other two labels be? And then and you have to make a choice. And when you're done, once you finish filling the thing in, the condition that the geometry ends up imposing on you is that no two lettered pipes cross twice. It's a non-local condition. So because here I was insisting A not B, actually the same lettered pipe with the same letter can't even cross once. So if you only have one letter, then you don't have to deal with this non-local condition, and then that's exactly what's the case that Ravi was dealing with. Okay, so in 1 minute, I want to tell you two things. So the 1 minute, so one of the things is with Matthias Lederer. So what this is about is starting with the direct sum map as defining a ring structure on the sum of the homologies of all the Grassmannians. So this is one of the many ways to think about the ring of symmetric functions coming from the sum of the homologies of all Grassmannians. Not quite. You need to say the class of 0 planes in one space, or 1 planes in one space. I'll call those 1. Once you mod that out, then you get the ring of symmetric functions. And we say, why do homology? Why not do equivariant K-theory? And when we do that, we end up with this 2-parameter deformation. And so that was the easy part. The hard part was actually computing. And we managed to do that using the stuff from this page. And do we have the example? Yes. So here is work from the last couple of days on computing these pipe dreams on a computer. And there started being a lot of them. And I'd like to walk you through some of the example, and I don't have time. So we'll just show off to the amazing work of Franco Saliola. This stuff is now all in Sage.
So let's take one quick question.
We're not.
Just to be the quick. Then you should find Alan over lunch and ask him and talk to Franco about this. And we'll just take 1 minute to switch over for